I'm about to show you 3 psychological triggers in women that can create powerful emotional responses, reactions that often feel almost automatic. I call them switches because once you understand how they work, the response can be immediate and intense. These are not manipulation tactics, and they are not tricks. They are patterns rooted in human psychology that can influence attraction and emotional engagement when expressed in the right way. Just like visual cues can trigger responses in men, certain emotional cues can have a strong impact on women. In many ways, it's biological, instinctive, and deeply wired into human behavior. These are the kinds of triggers that can make someone think about you even when you're not around. They can create a sense of curiosity, desire, and emotional pull, sometimes strong enough that she begins seeking your attention instead of you constantly chasing hers. Today, you'll learn 3 of these switches, how they work psychologically, and how they can appear in real interactions. Understanding these ideas can completely change how you communicate, because instead of guessing how someone feels, you'll start recognizing patterns that naturally build attraction. Let's begin. Switch 1. Validation withdrawal. The first psychological switch involves something called validation withdrawal. It happens when someone initially receives attention, appreciation, or approval, and then experiences a slight reduction in that attention. Here's the psychology behind it. When a person receives validation, such as compliments, attention, or recognition, the brain releases dopamine. Dopamine is a chemical linked to pleasure and reward. It makes the experience feel good and encourages the brain to seek more of it. But something interesting happens when that validation is no longer given as consistently. Once the brain becomes used to receiving a reward, the sudden reduction can create a craving to experience that reward again. This mechanism is similar to what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement. When rewards are unpredictable, sometimes present and sometimes absent, the brain becomes more focused on trying to obtain them again. Many people make the mistake of giving constant validation. They compliment every time they see someone, respond instantly to every message, and always show the same level of approval. Over time, this becomes predictable, and the brain adapts to it. When something is constant, it stops feeling special. However, when validation is initially present and then slightly reduced, the contrast becomes noticeable. The brain recognizes the change and starts wondering why the dynamic shifted. In real interactions, this might look like this. Early on, you give genuine attention and appreciation. You notice details about her personality, her ideas, or her style. She feels seen and valued, and her brain associates those moments with positive emotions. Later, your energy becomes slightly more balanced. You remain friendly, but you're less instantly available. Compliments become less frequent, and responses are not always immediate. You're still respectful and engaged, but there is a subtle change in intensity. That contrast is what creates curiosity. Her mind may start asking questions. Why is the interaction different now? Did something change? How can that earlier connection return? This internal curiosity often leads to increased effort from her side, starting conversations more often, paying closer attention during interactions, or trying to regain that earlier emotional connection. The key factor here is contrast. If someone is always distant, people adapt to that distance. If someone is always validating, people adapt to that too. But the shift between the two creates psychological tension and curiosity, which can strengthen emotional engagement. Switch 2. Emotional contrast. The second switch involves emotional contrast, shifting between different emotional tones during interactions. Human beings naturally adapt to steady emotional environments. If every interaction feels exactly the same, always calm, always agreeable, always predictable, the emotional intensity gradually fades. But when conversations include different emotional energies, attention increases. The brain becomes more alert because it senses change. For example, a conversation might begin with humor and light teasing. There's laughter, playful energy, and relaxed communication. Then, for a moment, the tone shifts. The conversation becomes more thoughtful or serious. Maybe you challenge an idea or offer a different perspective. This shift creates contrast. When emotional states change, people become more engaged because their brain is processing something new. Their attention sharpens, and the interaction feels more dynamic rather than predictable. The key idea isn't negativity or conflict. It's simply variation, moving between playfulness, curiosity, seriousness, and humor in a natural way. When interactions contain this kind of emotional movement, they tend to feel more exciting and memorable. Conversations stop feeling flat and start feeling alive. She begins trying to figure out the shift, reading your energy and adjusting her approach. This engagement is stimulating to her mind, even if it creates a small amount of tension. Then the dynamic shifts again. The serious moment passes, and you return to being playful. Or after creating a little distance, you become warm again. These shifts between emotional states create a roller coaster effect that feels exciting because it constantly stimulates the mind. The key is that these changes must be natural, not forced. You are not pretending to be moody. Instead, you allow your real emotional range to show. You're playful when something genuinely feels funny. You become serious when you have a meaningful thought. You challenge something when you truly disagree. Authenticity is what makes it effective. Many men focus so much on being consistently pleasant that they remove all emotional variation. Every interaction has the same tone, the same friendly energy, and the same agreeable responses. This may feel safe, but it can also feel predictable. Predictable interactions rarely create strong emotional reactions. When emotional contrast appears, however, the experience becomes more engaging. During time with you, she may feel several emotions: joy from laughter, curiosity when challenged, comfort when warmth returns, and excitement from unpredictability. This range of emotions creates intensity and makes the interaction more memorable. Think about powerful movies or stories. They rarely maintain one emotional tone from beginning to end. Instead, they create contrast, tension followed by relief, conflict followed by resolution, humor mixed with seriousness. That emotional variation is what keeps people engaged. In conversations, the same principle applies. Instead of a flat interaction, you create a dynamic emotional experience. The brain finds varied emotional stimulation more rewarding than a steady, monotone exchange. Here is a simple example. You're teasing her playfully, and she's laughing. The atmosphere is light and relaxed. Then you shift slightly and say something sincere. I actually appreciate how thoughtful you are about things. The change from playful to genuine creates emotional contrast that makes the moment stand out. Switch 3. Physical tension and release. The third switch involves the subtle creation and release of physical tension through controlled proximity and occasional light contact. This pattern can increase awareness of physical presence and gradually build attraction. The idea is simple. Tension builds, then it is briefly released, and then it builds again. This pattern creates waves of anticipation. For example, imagine sitting next to her. Instead of immediately placing your arm around her, you sit close enough that there is only a small space between you. The closeness creates awareness without direct contact. After a while, you might briefly touch her arm while making a point in conversation. The contact is light and natural, and then it ends. That small moment of contact releases some of the tension while also creating anticipation. Later, in a louder environment, you might lean closer so she can hear what you're saying. The closeness increases physical awareness. The distance between you is smaller, and the moment feels more personal. Then you lean back again. These small cycles, moving closer, then giving space, create a pattern of tension and release. Over time, this rhythm can make the interaction feel more exciting and emotionally charged. Throughout the interaction, you're naturally shifting between closeness and space. Each cycle increases awareness and keeps the moment engaging. When multiple elements, emotional contrast, curiosity, and subtle physical awareness, come together, the interaction becomes much more memorable. Instead of hoping attraction appears randomly, you begin to understand the dynamics that often make people feel drawn to each other. Now you understand the 3 switches. The real question is whether you will start applying these ideas thoughtfully and naturally to create stronger, more engaging connections.